Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square, and with me is Benjamin Yount, the Center Square's Wisconsin correspondent. Let's just put it this way. One has to have budgeted quite a bit more for this 4th of July. And as long as we're talking about budgets, Benjamin Yount, I understand you're quite close in Wisconsin in passing a budget. A 2-year budget comes pretty darn close to setting a record if it doesn't indeed set the record.
Yeah, we're taping this here middle of the day on Thursday, the 29th. And by the time most people listen to this on Friday, the 30th, the state budget will be through the legislature and on its way to the governor. That doesn't mean it's a done deal. The Wisconsin Senate stayed up late on Wednesday night and approved a 2-year, that's how we do budgets here, the biennium, 2-year, $99 million spending plan. And that $99 million is the headline.
Is that million or billion?
Billion with a B. Did I confuse this and say million with an M? Well, then allow me to correct myself. $99 billion with a B, which comes out to about $50 billion each year. And to put that in perspective, the state of Wisconsin's budget is roughly the same size as the state of Illinois' budget, but Illinois has twice as many people. Spending $99 billion over 2 years, about $50 billion a year, was too much even for Republicans. Now, we'll get to the reaction here in a second, but this budget includes massive pay raises. Everybody who works for the state is going to get at least something. The University of Wisconsin is going to lose $32 million in DEI money, but overall is going to see more money.
You need to explain to some listeners what DEI stands for.
Yes, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the bane of the existence of the top Republican in the Wisconsin Assembly. And DEI is a focus on just what Wood said, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Robin Vos, the Assembly Speaker, says it is political indoctrination that reinforces a racist idea that America is a fundamentally flawed country based on our history with race. The university says diversity, equity, and inclusion is just about that, inclusion, and making sure that not everyone on a college campus looks or acts or thinks the same, that you bring people together from different backgrounds, different political ideologies, different sexualities, and bring them all together makes the university community better. This has become a budget battle because this is how Wisconsin settles its political battles, through the power of the purse. In addition to the university's money, there's $1 billion more earmarked for public schools in the state. There's also hundreds of millions of dollars set aside to build roads and bridges and even sometimes other public projects. The state doesn't necessarily pay for all of a new school or hospital. That's often done at the local level, but there is some money for the building. This received what you would expect, I think, broad support among most Republicans and condemnation among every single Senate Democrat. There were 2 Republican senators who voted against this plan. Steve Nass from Whitewater was one of them, and he took umbrage with just how much this budget spends. He wrote in a statement, "The budget submitted by the Joint Finance Committee will take this state from a $7 billion structural balance to a $2.5 billion structural deficit at the start of the next budget period." Wisconsin's $7 billion surplus fueled a lot of the spending. The creation of a $2.5 billion structural deficit as a result of the excessive spending contained in this budget means nearly all of the likely growth in state revenues over the next 2 to 4 years will be exhausted before we can even consider $1 of new spending in the next budget period, Nass wrote. He added this too. The 2023-2025 budget, this new state budget that we're talking about, will total more than $99 billion in spending for a state of only 5.9 million people. This is a $10 billion increase over the current budget, or about 11.7% in growth in spending. I've covered an awful lot of budgets in states across this country. I've covered 2, maybe 3 here in Wisconsin, and this is the first time that I have seen a Republican go on the record and bash their own leadership over spending too much money. Democrats in the state, of course, wanted more money spent. There was a long list of we should spend it on child care. There should be more money spent on public schools, according to some Democrats. And they were, of course, very angry that Wisconsin did not legalize marijuana in this budget. But this is a spending plan that at the end of the day, the headline is $99 billion over 2 years, just under $50 billion per year. And as Nass pointed out, there are barely 6 million people in the state of Wisconsin. This state run by fiscally conservative Republicans, at least in the legislature, is going to spend as much as the democratically controlled state of Illinois. And Illinois has twice as many people. Wisconsin looks fiscally conservative. If you compare Wisconsin to Michigan, if you compare Wisconsin to Minnesota, if you compare Wisconsin's state finances to the state finances of Illinois, then yes, Wisconsin looks very fiscally conservative. Republicans, Devin LeMahieu, can say we held the line on spending. We invested in our core priorities. We used one-time money for one-time investments, he would say. And it's all true. But at the end of the day, this is a shockingly large budget price tag. Now, Governor Evers, we wrote about this back in February. Governor Evers wanted a budget that was closer to $114 billion over 2 years. So again, by that kind of metric, hey, look, well, we didn't spend as much as he wanted to spend. This is a conservative budget. But when you compare this to a $10 billion increase over the last 2-year budget, then you start to realize they're spending $10 billion more. Now, there is a hope that there is a tax increase included in this, $4.4 billion. Most of that would come as an income tax increase. The rest of it would come as a property tax increase. But here's where Wisconsin becomes a sticky wicket. The governor in this state has very, very, very broad line item veto power. This is not a take it or leave it spending plan. The governor, once he gets this, can go through and in some cases erase parts of sentences to change the meaning. So he could very easily accept the $10 billion in new spending and reject the $4.5 billion in tax cuts. And at the end of the day, as we've talked about on this podcast several times, he'll get more money for public schools, more shared revenue for local governments across the state of Wisconsin. Milwaukee and Milwaukee County will get the ability to raise their sales taxes. The governor will get almost everything that he wanted, and Republicans won't get a tax cut. And at the end of the day, that's a political decision as to who the winner and the loser is there. But I'll tell you that conservative organization after conservative organization say the big loser here is not just conservative Republican lawmakers, but taxpayers who are going to have to pay $10 billion more to state government.
Well, yes. And a lot of the surplus that was there was from federal dollars. That is, after this year, after this budget, will no longer be there. If you start increasing your fixed costs and you have a surplus that has been depleted, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt.
If you win $10,000 on a scratcher, that's great. Don't run down to the dealership and buy a $75,000 pickup truck that you have to make monthly payments on, because that 10 grand, boy, you're flush today. Tomorrow, next year, year after that, then you're looking at paying for something going forward and you don't have the money for it. Now, the difference between budgeting at the state level and budgeting in your own household, the difference really is only in the amount of zeros that come after the first couple of numbers. And then you get into federal money and matching and Medicaid and transportation and gas taxes. But the plain math of a budget is exactly the same at home as it is at the State House. Devin LeMahieu said on the floor during the debate Wednesday night, we're using one-time money for one-time investments. That is true. There are an awful lot of conservative groups that were hoping that they would use this $7 billion surplus to finance massive tax reform to hopefully spur something different in Wisconsin. There was talk of cutting or eliminating Wisconsin's income tax when the budget surplus was $3.5 billion. The Institute for Reforming Government was licking its chops at the idea of $7 billion in tax reform. And here at the end of the day, maybe they'll get $4.5 billion.
Listeners can keep up with this story and much more at thecentersquare.com. This is Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for The Center Square. Please subscribe And thank you so much for listening.